involvement is about fake pharmaceutical pills. That's really interesting. We spent time with a group called La Union in Mexico City, where 80% of their money right now comes from fake pharmaceutical pills. And they're making these pills. And then we went to India as well, which is another source of pharmaceutical pills. You have like 40,000 online pharmacies that you can go to and buy prescription drugs without a prescription. So a lot of Americans are doing that because it's much cheaper. I think it's something like 20 million Americans are using the black market for their pills, for their drugs, because they can't afford them here, which is crazy. 20 million. It's crazy. And people that can't afford, that need these medications to survive, and they can't afford them here because we have the highest drug prices in the entire world.
And so when you say fake, is it, it's not manufactured by, Pfizer or whatever, but is it the same components?
It looks exactly the same, but a lot of these pills don't actually have any active ingredients. So we spent time with a guy making 20,000 pills a night out of this little, back house with a machine, a pill presser. And it was just calcium and food dye to make it look the color, whatever color he wanted. And he was selling it as amoxicillin and, very likely ending up in American homes because they ship it all around the world.
Wow.
Yeah. And in that case, the good luck of the buyer is that it was just calcium, but in many cases it gets mixed with cement and rat poison and all sorts of things.
They don't give a fuck.
They don't give a fuck. And even worse is the cartel in Mexico, we found out. There's a great LA Times investigation on this, and then we sort of started doing our own investigation. But they're mixing these drugs with fentanyl and meth. So I think it was something like 70% of the drugs that they bought and tested had actually had meth and fentanyl, and Americans were crossing the border into Mexico to buy these drugs and then dying.
Jesus.
It's insane. But it's all, again, it's like easy for us to blame the cartel and other people for doing this, but it's all our fault. It's the broken system that we have in our country. Why are we paying, this woman that we filmed with, she was paying $700 for this medication that she needs, and she couldn't afford it. Her health insurance wasn't covering it. So she would go across the border and pay $60 for it in Mexico. Of course.
Is any of it the real medication?
Yeah, some of it is.
Is there a way to tell?
And they're real pharmacies. But
So some of the real pharmacies have fake drugs?
So that's what's so interesting is that even pharmacies that are real, that are completely authentic and legitimate, and that there's a town that we filmed that called Algodones, for example, that's on the other side of the Arizona border, that has more hospitals and orthodontists and opticians, how do you say the glasses? Optometrists than anywhere else in the world. It's basically you drive around and it's like doctor's office, pharmacy, optometrist, all of it. And it's all catering to Americans, right? And so vast numbers of Americans come every year and buy their drugs there. And there are pharmacies that are chained pharmacies that could be a CVS, but in Mexico. It's not a CVS, but it could be sort of a brand name that you recognize in Mexico. But what we did with the cartel is we were trying to figure out how they get their medications in these shelves. And we filmed one cartel member. He allowed us to film. We couldn't go inside, but he had a mic, so I was able to listen to everything from the car. He goes into a pharmacy and basically tells the woman there, like this, and the meds we saw them making them. They look exactly like the real thing, the packaging, everything. Some of it actually comes from the legitimate places that they steal from the factories, like the packaging and all of it. But they basically tell them, okay, you put this on your shelves, and if you don't, we're going to burn your pharmacy. So we heard that. We saw that. And so a lot of them are forced to carry them.
And they're forced to carry fake drugs.
Yeah.
And do they have any idea what's in them when they're selling them, or they're just...
I don't think they do. No. I doubt that they knew, for example, that there was fentanyl and meth mixed in with some of their other medications, because that creates a huge problem for them.
And so for the consumer, how do they find the legitimate stuff?
They don't, which is why it's so hard. So this woman that we followed, she goes there, she buys her medication, and I asked her, do you know what's in there? Oh, no, but my friend told me that it's a legitimate pharmacy. Of course, she has no idea that this is happening and that the cartel is actually threatening them to death if they don't stock their shelves with their fake pharmaceuticals.
Did you take any of that stuff and test it?
We did. It's a lot more complicated than it seems. The LA Times, again, did an amazing investigation where they did test it. And again, I think it was something like 7 or 8 out of their 10 that they tested had fentanyl and meth, which was crazy, out of 2 pharmacies, I think.
And
which
what
was
kind of
insane.
drugs are they talking about that have fentanyl and meth in it?
Oh, I can't remember, but it was, I think it was Adderall maybe. I can't remember exactly. But it was a great investigation. And yeah, in our story, we sort of looked at how it ends up in the shelves and who's making it and how it's being produced. There's an amazing doctor in Mexico City called Dr. Loco, who we spent time with, a crazy doctor, Dr. Loco, who was a chemist himself, doctor as well, and his father owned a pharmacy, so he sort of knew how to, and he showed us he's putting the little silicone pouch inside and the cotton ball that goes inside, and it looks exactly the same. Like no one would have been able to tell.
God, that's so scary.
So scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence that that happens in America?
That it's being sold in America? Yeah, we went with a raid with the LA Sheriff's Department where we saw a sort of a grocery store in the back that were selling these medications, mainly to underprivileged immigrant communities because they couldn't
But they're
afford
not
the real
in
stuff.
legitimate pharmacies.
Not that
Not
we've
yet.
known. Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
That
But
we know of.
no, not yet that we know of. But again, it's at the end we went and visited a spokesperson for a group called Pharma, that is a lobby group that represents the pharmaceutical companies. And she was very happy to talk about how counterfeit medications are very damaging for America, right?
Yeah,
Because
so is the real ones.
and that's why I asked her, but why is it that 20 million Americans have to resort to a black market because they can't afford their medications here?
Yeah.
And that whole conversation, as you know, is fascinating.
Yeah, what
and
did she say about
frustrating. Well, she says that they need the money for innovation, R&D, right? Research and development, and that's how they can get new drugs that are important for Americans. I said, that's all great, but if Americans can't afford these medications, they're not going to be treated by them because they can't afford them. And then I asked her, have you actually spent any time with any of these Americans that cannot afford their life-saving medications? She said, no. That's the biggest problem, right?
that? Yeah.
Yeah, but she keeps saying that without that expense, without that money, they wouldn't be able to look for all these new drugs, which is also BS because I think it's something like 34% or 35% of the money that was spent, or it was 35% more money spent on advertisement and, trying to sell the drug than there was on actual R&D, research and development. So,
Of course. Not only that, to say that they're not profitable after all that.
oh, I mean,
Those people are
what was it,
making-
like $100 billion, the top 10 companies in the
Yeah.
last year alone or 2 years, something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that.
Yeah, they make plenty.
Yeah. Oh, it's
It's greed
pure greed.
and it's evil.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm sure, have you seen the Netflix series